Cyber Monday. I've got my co-host with me, Dominic Vogel. Dominic, who's sitting in the hot seat today?
Today in the hot seat is Tyler Hatch, who is the founder and CEO of DFI Forensics. And I think the really interesting thing with Tyler, compared to a lot of other digital forensics people that you and I have met over the years, is that he is a lawyer by trade. That's his background.
Right.
And that provides such interesting insight, being able to, on that digital forensics side, being able to understand what type of evidence you need to be able to preserve and how you end up presenting that in a court of law. That's just a tremendous, behavioral aspect that he has that so many other people in the digital forensic space don't have. So, I think it's going to be a really interesting conversation with him. He's incredibly insightful, and he's occasionally funny as well.
Yeah, and he does such a good job of talking about a proactive message, because typically forensics is more reactive in fixing problems for individuals' private information and companies' private information. He preaches a proactive message, which is really good of him to do that. Also, he's talking so well about assets, your information assets, and the value they have to an organization. So I'm really looking forward to getting into it. So let's invite the guest in. I'm going to hop into this chair. We'll bring Tyler in.
Tyler, thanks so much for taking time out of your busy day to chat with Christian and I. I know we probably have a million things to chat about, so let's dive right in.
Yeah, absolutely. It's good to have you on today. So your background as a lawyer. Tell us how your story, how you were a lawyer and then you got into digital forensics.
Yeah, so I was a practicing lawyer in British Columbia, a litigation lawyer for about 6 years. And I left the practice of law for a couple reasons. But in the end, I found my way into a digital forensics firm locally here. And as soon as I started working there, I just absolutely loved the field, and I saw how relevant it was for the legal community, for all the digital aspects of our modern world, and I just dove headfirst into it. And I started learning more about the field, and I eventually left and developed my own company, DFI Forensics, because I felt there was a better way to offer the services and treat clients and form relationships. And I'm really privileged to be able to do this. So it's a really interesting field.
That's really cool. Do you think your background as a lawyer has helped you in developing a forensics company in terms of what you guys do?
Without question. So I think there's a few reasons for that. I think the way lawyers are trained, we are trained to look and think about problems in a very logical sense, breaking things down outside of their factual element to the core elements of an argument or a set of facts. And so we see if that fits into a legal problem or a law, whether that applies. So coming from that background, when you're an investigator, it's very important to do that, because you have to see, does the evidence that I'm working with lead to the conclusion that I think it does? And you have to question that and be a little critical in thinking. And that's what legal training teaches you to view a problem like. Also, having been in court myself and presented evidence, it's really useful to know, have that experience, because when we investigate something and find an answer, we've already done the critical thinking analysis on that evidence to see, make sure that our conclusion is valid, there's no holes in it, it's verifiable, it's good to go for use in court. And then, of course, I understand the law of evidence, what's admissible, what's not, things like confidentiality, and just understanding the law. When we work with a lot of lawyers, it's helpful to understand the legal foundation within which the problem we're looking at is.
That's really cool.
Yeah, it's a really excellent fit.
Wow.
That's awesome. I imagine you find yourself in a lot of different wild and crazy scenarios.
We certainly do.
Yeah. So in a professional setting. Yeah.
That's true. Yeah. From the problems that we see, it's really interesting, and we may even just get a strictly technical question that we're asked to answer, but the overall fact pattern is usually mind-blowingly, it's just phenomenal. These things are just outrageous at times, and when we're looking at personal computers and devices that people have been using, we almost always see something interesting on them, even if it's not really relevant to the actual case that we're working on. So yeah, it's very interesting.
So let's talk about where you find this evidence. So it would be cell phones, tablets, computers, sometimes in the cloud. Where do you find it, and what's kind of your forensics process?
So the overall process starts with ensuring that the evidence is collected properly. And when we say forensics, we are really focusing on presenting that evidence in court. That's always the goal. And we don't want to cut any corners or miss any steps that would lead to that evidence being inadmissible. So that's always the first process. So collection is very important. Identifying the type of devices that we're working with and where the evidence will be found is important.
So forensics, the word forensics means for evidence in court, correct?
Correct. Yes, that's absolutely right. Awesome. So, yeah, and so when we say our field is digital forensics, we look at digital devices and evidence that's computer based and digital. And the forensics component is, of course, collecting it and going through all the protocols to make sure it's admissible in court. Mm-hmm. And so, yeah, you identified the big three, which is computers, tablets, and cell phones. Mm-hmm. But we also investigate cloud accounts, like Dropbox. A lot of employees, for example, will take information from their employer, intending to then compete against it, and that's unlawful in a lot of contexts. And they upload the information into, say, a Dropbox account, or they email it to themselves, or there's a variety of cloud storage accounts that we can look at. And also within a company's IT network, there's also user profiles, and that we can see what somebody has done to access certain files and perhaps copy them off or transfer them away. So that's sort of an internal threat that a lot of businesses work with.
Yeah, that's a really interesting piece and a really interesting value that you add personally because of your legal experience as a lawyer. You can really empathize with lawyers needing admissible evidence
Yes.
in a court case.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And I think there's even an element to which it goes above and beyond just what we're asked to do. Like, I'll give you an example. We recently were asked a technical question because there was already an expert retained by the plaintiff's lawyer, and we were engaged by the defense lawyer for this technical issue about what should be done with this device. And in the context of reviewing the information that we were provided, I noticed the expert on the other side was referring to himself in this kind of strange way as an IT specialist, which is a little bit of a red flag because nobody in our profession tends to do that. And there were just some other things that were just not quite right. And I had a sense about this guy. And even though all of the lawyers felt that he was an expert and well qualified, when I started doing some digging, he actually wasn't qualified whatsoever in terms of actual certifications. He also happened to be a convicted criminal in the States for selling fake cancer drugs. And none of the lawyers knew this. And I was the one that brought that to light. And it's just because that legal sense that I have, you know, this guy doesn't seem to have the expertise that he purports to have. Wow. And I sensed that something was off, and it was.
So was that a tingling feeling you get?
It was a little tingly. Yeah. Yeah, it was like having a Red Bull.
Wow. That's awesome.
Yeah.
When we're talking again about forensics, and maybe just in the small and mid-sized businesses, is that something that can be done proactively? Like, when should a small or mid-sized business be thinking about engaging with a forensics firm?
Well, even before we get to the point of engaging us, they should be considering some element of preserving evidence, because employees these days are using electronics and computer devices like never before. They're literally everywhere. So a good example would be maybe if you have an employee leave, particularly a high-level employee, you might want to hold on to the cell phone that they were using. You might want to hold on to their computer or take the hard drive out and preserve it for a period of time, because you may learn something. This happens very frequently. You may learn something about the employee who's left that you don't like, and now you want to investigate their computer. And this is happening currently with the case that we're just onboarding right now. That laptop from the employee who left was repurposed to another employee. So now we have to go back and we have to try and uncover all the activity that's been layered upon the actual suspect's activity.
Right.
And that's a lot more difficult and a lot more challenging to do. And we would have avoided all of that if somehow that evidence was preserved. So there are proactive things that people can and should do.
So it sounds like in this case, and probably other cases as well, it's cheaper to do things proactively.
Much.
Because they're now
Yes.
having to pay you to do a whole lot more investigative work.
Yes, much cheaper. And another thing that companies can do proactively is if they think there's going to be an issue of looking at devices once an employee has left, they should consider the company buying and owning the devices that the employees use. So a lot of businesses will provide their employees, allow their employees to bring their own devices, and that's attractive to the business because it saves them money.
Sure.
But when you need to look at that device once there's no longer a relationship there, you have no ownership over it. So in order to get it, you either have to get the person's permission or you have to go to court to get an order to seize it by force. And that's very expensive and time consuming.
An implied point here is that information is sensitive and valuable.
Yes.
So when they have this on their own devices or on a company device, it's an asset to the organization. And as Dominic often says, it's a toxic asset.
Yeah, absolutely. And if it gets out there in the wrong hands, it's difficult to trace where it's gone. And what I mean by that is if it goes to a cell phone or a computer, there's an operating system there that's keeping records and making logs of events. But if it's copied onto, say, an external hard drive that's really just a storage box of data, there's no logs that are going to tell us if that's been copied to another place. So we don't know how far it goes once it leaves the organization's hands. And that's a big problem for a lot of businesses. They want to know, who has my data now and where has it been, and can I have confidence that I have it back? So
is that sort of that notion of being aware of where sensitive data is going? Are you seeing that more organizations are asking that question? Because I know we've run into some organizations where maybe there's a really severe malware incident and they're not sure if data was pilfered or not, and often the approach is, we'll just repurpose everything, rebuild the network, and re-image the machines, and we're fine. Is not taking the time to do that proper forensics a misstep? Because some will say, we're more focused on our operational uptime. We want to make sure people are up and going rather than trying to see if data was stolen or not. How can we help sort of small and mid-sized businesses find that middle ground?
Perfectly said. It is middle ground because from our perspective, we would always want to do the investigation, but there has to be some balance and some benefit to doing that. And there's always a cost involved in doing that. So businesses have to consider that. Obviously, the priority is to get back up and running. But what I see since last November, there's been a change in Canadian law where now there's reporting obligations and you have to inform clients and your customers if their data has been accessed. And that would be advice that comes through a lawyer. And in order for that lawyer to give a reasonable opinion on what the obligations are, they need to know the factual framework that they're dealing with. And that's where we come in. We provide that. So we provide the information of an attack or a penetration or a compromise situation. And we can tell you if data has been accessed, how much, for how long, those kinds of things that are important. So a company has to weigh the balances when they're considering that. But
for organizations that you deal with, is it easier if they are already taking a more proactive cybersecurity stance compared to those in which they aren't even doing the basics when it comes to cybersecurity? Where's sort of the contrast?
Yeah, there's always a bare minimum that we can do to be proactive, and it really exponentially leads to saving and saving of money. Saving of time. It allows us to be more efficient. If we can have a conversation before an incident occurs, we can talk to them about what evidence we might want to consider if something bad happens. And then we can be sure that they're logging that information and backing it up. And we can talk to them about, the quick wins like you guys, do it with your clients as well. There are certain low-hanging fruit that you can work with clients to accomplish very important things that are being overlooked very quickly. And so it's the same thing for us, and it just allows us to help them a lot better.
Yeah, it seems counterintuitive that you are preaching a proactive message because obviously a lot of your clients are the house is on fire.
Yes.
And you stand to make a whole lot more money with the business that you're in from a reactive state. I remember one time Dominic and I went into a law firm, and we preached to them a very proactive message, and it went over like a lead balloon. It was our worst presentation ever of our lives, not because we didn't do a good job, but because
that was brutal.
It really was like talking to divorce lawyers about premarital counseling and good marriage counseling.
Right.
So you even still are have a heart for businesses, it sounds like, and a heart for business owners, being one yourself.
Well, I was just
to
going to say
save
that.
them from the pain of having to pay you too much on the
Absolutely,
wrong side of the
I mean, and that whole philosophy of actually helping people and bringing value to a business is what the three of us are all about. And that's why I like working with you guys, because we all have that philosophy.
Yes.
At the end of the day, I do well enough. I'm going to survive, and I'm going to earn enough money to have a living. It's not about earning money. It's about helping people. And if I can help people effectively and in a way that's going to help them, and I don't earn as much money as if the house was on fire and I get a call in the middle of the night on a Saturday, I think that's a win-win. We all accomplish, we can reach more people and help more people.
Feel like you're doing good and you can sleep well at night.
Yeah, there's really a higher purpose than making money for a lot of us in the InfoSec community. We genuinely see a big problem going on in our world, and we all want to help people. And it takes a lot of education, and we're going to have presentations like that where the message falls on deaf ears. We know that, but we don't stop. We keep going, and we keep screaming the message from the rooftop.
Yeah, that's why we do what we do.
Absolutely. Yeah.
I'm curious with some of your clients. I mean, I imagine that they'll come to you at sort of various stages of grief. In terms of what you see, do they tend to be very high stress, depending on what the situation is? Low stress? I mean, I'm curious to know because often when we deal with clients, their demeanor is fairly constant. We're not in the middle of a burning room, so to speak.
Right.
I'm very curious to know about some of your experiences in that regard.
Yeah, the most interesting thing that I encounter is people who have been spied on.
Interesting.
Everybody says the word hacked, and I have
It's overused.
I have great disdain for the word hacked because it means so many things. I've even had somebody say they've been hacked, like it's some sort of Apple proprietary hacking technology. But yeah, when their devices have been compromised and they lose their sense of privacy and security, it's a really unsettling feeling for them. And these are reasonable, high-level professional people that get very scared very quickly, and they come to us and they generally want us to examine their devices because something's going on and they think somebody's spying on them. And they get a lot of comfort in just talking to somebody who knows that there is some validity to what they're experiencing, because people can absolutely be hacked and spied on, and there's tools out there that it can happen. What they think is going on and what's actually technically possible sometimes doesn't line up. So I like to meet with those people and ask a series of questions and sort of rule out possibilities that are either impossible or so remotely possible that we shouldn't be concerned about.
Yeah, it's like Sherlock Holmes method, wasn't it?
Absolutely, yes, absolutely. Yeah, I learned from the best. And I've had clients that are so disturbed by what they're going to that they don't even allow me to take notes on my laptop when I meet with them. They've requested that I turn off the security camera in my office.
Really?
They just get hyper paranoid, and I understand that, and I always try to accommodate it. At the end of the day, you've just got to weed through what's technically possible, align it with what they're actually experiencing on a factual level, and just see what jives. And sometimes the advice is you're probably not experiencing what you think you are, and sometimes the advice is there may be something here, and we should look further into it.
Yeah, so, I know that you work with a lot of individuals and professionals and small, medium-sized business owners. You've also worked on some high-profile cases that we probably are not able to discuss today. In terms of outside of your own clientele, what are some of the scenarios that you have seen, whether in the news or come across your desk, that have involved breaches, attacks, hacks, that are notable for you and would be worth the business leaders that are watching, know about? What would be one or two interesting cases?
I guess I'll start with business people and business organizations. So I see there being 4 threats. The most prevalent ones are obviously data breaches. When we look at things like the Marriott data breach that was so huge and was going on for so long in an organization that should have a very large budget to prevent that kind of thing, or at least detect it before 4 years or however long it was, that would be good. Recently in Canada, we've seen the Desjardins breach, which as you quite correctly pointed out was more of a leak due to some sort of insider goings on.
Yeah.
And then the Capital One data breach from last week, which was enormous and is going to cause a lot of damage, in my opinion, to consumers. And when you see things like going on, it's always shocking. It's such a high level breach. So there's that data breach component that people are starting to become aware of. But for a lot of organizations, that's not really the threat. Those are the high level people that are keeping confidential information. Right. What I see going on is a lot of malware attacks involving where you encrypt the network and demand a ransom. These ransomware attacks. It's a huge problem. And the starting point is to lock down your IT, work with you guys, somebody who's going to guide them through the data protection and security aspect. But when a problem happens, it's almost always due to some form of human error. Somebody has been exquisitely phished through an email, and these are very sophisticated emails that you get. These cyber criminals are doing a lot of reconnaissance. They know who your organization is, they know who your supply chain is, and they send you very real looking, credible emails that people are going for. If it wasn't credible, if these weren't sophisticated attacks, people wouldn't be falling for it.
Yep.
It's a huge problem. Yep. So, and again, people are starting to become aware of that. The question is, what do you do about it? So there's a few quick wins I think that we can always counsel people on there. And then one of the things that I'm seeing a lot of nowadays, and I touched on this with you, Dominic, the other day, is this email compromise.
Yes.
And I've even seen recently this label be put on it, BEC, business email compromise. So emails are being compromised, and the objective is to get in between communication between one party and another party where they're sending money. And the cyber criminals get inside this communication and they redirect the money to their own accounts.
They impersonate and then they commit fraud.
Absolutely, yeah. So they impersonate, so a representative from company A, and they send an email to company B saying, when you make that giant payment to us, make sure it goes to our new account, X, Y, and Z, and it gets redirected in Canada and then offshore very quickly, and the money's gone. And I've seen law firms get victimized by that in terms of settlement funds being redirected. I've seen large construction companies who have sent big accounts payable payments of over $250,000 that have been intercepted and there. So this is a really up and coming thing that I'm seeing, and it's going to be happening a lot. And the interesting thing is I think there's going to be a lot of lawsuits out of this because company A gets hacked and that's their responsibility, and they usually accept that happened to them. But company B doesn't do a whole lot to confirm the new instructions.
Right.
So there's an issue of who's at fault now, or who's more at fault.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of these cases will start heading to court. And we've been asked to come and investigate a lot of these things because the factual groundwork will have to be laid for a lawsuit. So those are the three outside threats that I'm currently seeing for businesses. And then the fourth one that I mentioned would be the insider threat of employees or rogue employees that want to harm the organization.
Sure. So you could have intentional insiders or malicious insiders.
Most definitely.
And then you could have the unwitting or
accidental.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And I think I'm not sure which one the Desjardins one is. I believe it was more of an accidental. Was it more malicious? Okay. Yeah. But I think there are a lot of them that are malicious. Like people get fired and they're not happy about it.
Yep.
I've seen, one of the large Vancouver-based restaurants fired an employee, and on this person's way out the door, they decided in a moment of haste and anger that they were going to grab thousands and thousands of credit card transactions.
Wow.
And fortunately, this person came to their senses very quickly and did the right thing and just returned it.
Yeah.
But that could have been very bad, and the company could have been liable for any of those losses if that information gets out.
Yeah.
Absolutely, yeah.
Wow.
I mean, these things can happen very quickly, and it's just because you're allowing somebody who's not a very high-level employee, maybe they shouldn't have access to that information.
Yeah.
Maybe it shouldn't be that accessible.
Yeah.
And that's what people should work with guys like you to lock those things down. Right?
Agreed.
Tyler, this was such an amazing conversation, and we appreciate you coming to the studio and freestyling with us. So
Always a pleasure.
Yeah,
We need to have you back because I feel like we have to continue this conversation.
I know,
There's so
yeah.
much more to talk about.
absolutely. And no, thank you again so much.
My pleasure, guys. Thanks for having me on. It was really fun.
That was a fantastic episode. What was your biggest takeaway from Tyler today?
He's just such an engaging personality. A lot of forensics people are. It looks like they don't come out to see the light of day. He is really interesting. Although he does have pale skin, but he is a really
Despite
interesting.
the fair skin.
That's right. He's such an interesting character, and like I said, I think for me that big takeaway again is his whole perspective. There's a lot of digital forensics who will just do things in isolation and not see the big picture. I think Tyler, because of his background, has that big picture in terms of knowing what that end game is. And that end game is often how that plays out in a court of law. So him knowing that and being able to sort of explain to our viewers and listeners what that looks like, I thought that was really cool.
I agree. And I think for me, it was preserving evidence proactively. It's easier and it's cheaper to do that and a whole lot less stress.
Yeah.
Thanks for watching. If you want to check out our other podcasts, you can go to conversationsthatmatter.tv, and we will see you next Monday.